basic understanding that only speakers will speak, others keep their mics muted. And we will start with Dan, then Jeff, and then by that time Neil will join. Neil is actually in Hawaii. Hawaii is, it's probably 4 in the morning at this point in time. So he will join us by the time 2 speakers are done. I was listening to this nitrogen complementation that Alfalfa does, and Dan has said that we have a large data set. We would really like to receive those data and maybe try to make a case, because in Pakistan, the rotation is missing. There is no rotation. It's a cereal after cereal, potato after potato, potato after corn, and corn after potato, cotton. So this is one of the major reasons that we're trying to, plug in this kind of discussion. And Jeff spoke about intercropping. Intercropping is quite often spoken about in Pakistan. But my question is, how badly sorghum affects nitrogen while alfalfa complements nitrogen? Sorghum on the other extreme is a very exhaustive choice. So it would be interesting to see this kind of data, and maybe we could incorporate as appendices to our report after this webinar. For every webinar, I try to compile a report, and I tend to recruit younger people. So I ask them to basically become authors, and we help them write good reports. So I'm seeing a young fodder scientist working with Dan now, but how many years? 4 years or 5 already?
Yes, sir. It's almost 5th year started. I still last year probably. Okay,
so you better take notes. Let's compile a good report for this event.
Sure, sir. I'll be taking that one.
So Minister Saab has joined, and I'm waiting for Sayyid Yawar Ali. As soon as he is on, we'll get started. But even otherwise, I think in 2 minutes, I'll
Thank you for those comments, Dr. Krar. I think the issue of the rotational benefits of alfalfa and also Berseem clover, but alfalfa probably a little bit more than Berseem, have been widely underappreciated, and it's true in the United States too. But I've seen in China just continuous grain crops year after year after year after year, and I've seen that in Pakistan. I've seen that in the Middle East, and I think it's really a mistake to think of cropping systems as only having grain crops year after year. We need to incorporate a legume in that rotation.
And in the United States, that legume is primarily soybean. So you see a lot of soybean rotation with corn or sorghum or other things too. So soybeans is for the most part, the big crop rotation in the Midwest, where most of our cereal crops are grown. The other thing about intercropping is that, Africans have been intercropping cowpeas and sorghum for years. And you're right, sorghum does utilize the nitrogen, but again, it depends on what kind of sorghum you're using and how much nitrogen that crop actually needs. But intercropping has actually been a fairly robust system of farming in Africa for a long time as well.
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time to get started. 8 p.m. already in Pakistan, and early morning 8 a.m. in California. We today have a very experienced panel with us, and I'm hoping that the practitioners and academics, students who are attending this series, they get benefited. The title for today's, we call it Agriculture Policy Debate, is Animal Nutrition and Fodder Science. The purpose of this series is actually to address practical problems. We tend to benefit from the global experience, and then develop reports and proposals which could complement our existing knowledge, and also become a what you call as an advocacy event. And I'm already seeing the benefit of doing so because a lot of media interaction coming out of these events, and we also receive questions from the stakeholders and the policy avenues. Today our event shall be chaired jointly by Syed Yawar Ali, the chairman of Nestle Pakistan, and Sardar Hasnan Dreshik. He is provincial minister for livestock. Both of them are very keen listener, and they make very solid comments also. We have had the opportunity of having them on board earlier on, particularly Dreshik Saab is present in nearly every event that we organize. In this 10th event, I would like to also welcome the industry participation. There was enthusiastic industry participation. You know, I started receiving calls from industry partners that we are also interested in this business, because this fodder business, particularly because of silage and hay-making advances, is picking up in Pakistan. And I believe that the system needs to have a strong agribusiness linked on the side of fodder as well as on the side of milk and meat industries. To begin the show, I request Dan Putnam to start with his presentation. Dan is professor at University of California, Davis. Dan has visited Pakistan. Dan has one of our graduate students working with him on fodder science. We have been interacting for nearly 5 years now. And I believe that Dan has extremely relevant knowledge from the science side, as well as how that could be linked with the issues and challenges in Pakistan. So over to you, Dan.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Krar. I really appreciate the invitation, and I'm going to share my screen with you right now. Let's see here, if I can do that. Let me just look here. Okay, I really appreciate this opportunity to interact again with our Pakistani friends in Multan and Faisalabad and other locations in Pakistan. And I wanted to thank Dr. Krar and Dr. Kamar for the invitation. Particularly want to thank Umair Gul, who is my PhD student here at UC Davis, who we collaborated on this presentation. And the title here is the concept of sustainable intensification of forage production systems. Particularly with comments, and I'll just make some comments about about the possibilities that might be there in Pakistan. We really do appreciate both Jeff and I and Khaled Bali, who is here in California, and others that have visited Pakistan for the many generous hostings that we experienced there. Really learned a lot about the situation there, and so we really appreciate our friendship as well as the things that we've learned. As I've said, when I was in Pakistan, we come from different cultures, different areas of the country, but I think we have a lot more in common than we do have differences. And I think that's, particularly as scientists, I think that's something that we should be reiterating. Of course, the focus really is on the Pakistani farmers who must feed their animals, must produce crops for their benefit, as well as the benefit of their families and the culture as a whole. And Pakistan, I think, is nearing a population of 200 million souls, and so productivity is really an important issue. So the key ideas that I'd like to put across today are this concept of sustainable intensification and what we can do to intensify our yields and quality of our fodder crops. And how that's linked to dairy production issues, which fundamentally start with the forages and other feeds. I'm going to address a little bit the yield gap for alfalfa and try to put across a few ideas for improvement in leguminous forages for Pakistan. In my view, there are probably three different areas of opportunities for improvement. One is on technology. That might be irrigation, harvesting methods, pest control, varieties, and so forth. The other has to do with management systems and how those technologies are put into practice. And the third is really an engagement with farmers, and I have to say also industry, because industry is a real key partner when we're thinking about improvement of cropping systems. What is this concept of sustainable intensification? Well, the idea there is that we really shoot for very high yield production on a more limited acreage, particularly high yield and high quality that might be possible under ideal conditions. We need to apply an economic matrix to this to make sure that the return to farmers is attractive and that not too much money is being spent to achieve those high yields. We also have to think about the better utilization of limited resources, and particularly in soil and water resources, but other resources as well. We also have to think about this concept of soil health and preserving our agricultural systems for future generations. And this is where the crop rotation idea comes into play. And to minimize environmental impacts per unit of production, and particularly climate impacts or water impacts. And all agriculture has some impact on the environment, but the question is, per unit of production, is it less or more? One of the things that's really a key here is what, as an example, is this sustainable intensification. The tomato industry in California over the last 20-some years have adapted technologies, and you can see here that the yield levels about 20 years ago were pretty much on a plateau, and then after the adaptation of subsurface drip irrigation, over that period of time, we've seen a 30% yield increase, and that was a combination of both more careful water management, but also more precise fertilizer management, and this meant that we could reduce the acreage required for tomato production, and also reduce the amount of impact of nitrogen on the environment. So in alfalfa, we could do some of these same things, but we can do them with existing irrigation technologies like flood and sprinkler irrigation systems, drip, if drip is possible or manageable. And the question is, are there some really opportunities for sustainable intensification in alfalfa? And I believe that there are. Let's turn to dairy for a moment here. If you look at the dairy production curves over the last 70 to 100 years, you can see that cows per have, in the olden days used to produce about 4 to 6 liters per day. These days, an average cow produces about 30 liters per day, and the more advanced animals produce 50 to 60 liters per day. So there's and the dairy industry has increased their dairy production per animal about 2 to 3% per year since about 1970. This is a phenomenal rate of increase. Many countries are still in this sort of moderate range with productivity. And the question I would put forward is, what are the impacts of higher productivity per cow? Well, certainly we would need fewer cows to achieve yields, and lower impacts on the environment, and particularly greenhouse gases, when you can produce the same amount of milk with one animal as you might have produced with 4 to 5 or 6 animals previously. So why is this increase here? And some of the animal scientists on here probably would want to weigh in, but I would think, I'm not an animal scientist, but improved genetics and better dairy management are probably the two big ones. cow comfort and veterinary. Culling rates is a big part of that, milking strategies, but also better feeding strategies. A high-producing dairy cow cannot be fed the coarse forages that we might have fed 60 years ago. And so we need to look at high-quality alfalfa and silages, concentrates and concentrated feeds and grains, and also a scientific approach to ration balancing to make sure that we're optimizing feeds. So for Pakistan, you know, my thinking is that we really need to take a market-driven approach, recognizing what drives the economics of forage production, and primarily it's going to be dairy, at least I would think so. And there has to be a market for these high-quality forage crops. And milk is generally the economic engine that we're looking for here. In terms of limiting factors, water is one of our major limiting factors, and we have to really think of combinations of different kinds of forages, alfalfa, Berseem, corn, and sorghum, and other miscellaneous forages, along with concentrates to produce the most milk. So let's not think just about production, let's think about the way the markets are functioning. So envisioning these high-yielding, high-quality alfalfa forage systems, I think we need to link them to the eventual markets. We need to envision a system of crop rotations as well as production of individual crops. We need to look at many management factors, including agronomic practices, irrigation management, weed and pest management. I think it's important to learn from other countries, but there, at least in my observation, there have to be unique Pakistani solutions to these questions that incorporate both the small and large producers that are common to your country. Alfalfa and Berseem are probably the two most promising and valuable legume options. It's really our premier perennial leguminous forage is alfalfa, and it's very well adapted to Pakistan as it is to California. Berseem is an excellent rotation crop in rotation with grains and cotton and other row crops. One of the key limitations that we observed there is the possibility of preserving forage yield and quality, and I think some emphasis there on silage and haymaking is probably pretty important, because in the technology of silage and hay preservation, because it's difficult to preserve that quality. So as we transition from grazing to harvested forages to mechanized types of systems, which are seen here, you know, there's some real advantages to mechanized systems. Not to say that we can't use the other systems as well, but there's some real advantages to capturing that quality and capturing that yield in a timely fashion. So if you look at cut and carry methods versus mechanical harvest for both Berseem and alfalfa, continuous harvest of Berseem or alfalfa results in some forage being very, very high quality, but low yields, while some forage might be very, very high yielding, but low quality. And so when it's continually harvested over a period of weeks, we do need high quality forages preserved for summer production when those leguminous forages are not as widely available. And the monsoon system also limits preservation during that time, and so silage is really one of those key options for the monsoon period. And it's appropriate really for all farm sizes, so small and large. And this question is here, can we optimize both yield and quality for optimum forage production? When I think through the issues of high quality alfalfa yields, and we know that yields are sometimes disappointing to farmers, and we, you know, from a scientific perspective, let's try to analyze what keeps our farms from achieving those maximum yields. And we call this the yield gap. That is the difference between on-farm yields and the potential yield for a region. The potential yield for a region is defined by the growing season, and the growing season and the soil type and the water resources in Pakistan are very, very similar to that of California, and so your yield potential is very high when you have water. It's common for all crops to look at these differences, and they might be 2 to 3 fold. I believe that Pakistan is fully capable of achieving world-class yields of high-quality alfalfa. This is an analysis of the California yields, and you can see here that yields in California range from only about 3 metric tons per hectare up to about 33. It's about a 10-fold difference. So as reported by farmers, the average yields are right around in here, but you can see the wide range of farm yields. And so the question is, how do farmers move up this yield curve closer to this maximum yield level? And there's a whole series of analyses that can be done to try to figure that out. So if you look over the last 100 years or so, California in particular has gone from about 7 metric tons per hectare to an average yield of about 17. And as I mentioned before, we have a yield potential here of about 30. What are the key technological innovations? Number one, I think, is mechanization of harvest. If you look at the history of California production, we used to cut about 4 times a year in, say, the Davis, Sacramento area. We're cutting about 7 times a year now. And so that efficiency really allows more rapid regrowth and recovery of the crop and ability to manage water more successfully. Irrigation technology is another big one, with laser leveling of fields and also introduction of sprinkler irrigation and subsurface drip irrigation. Herbicides and insecticides came in the 1950s. Pest resistance varieties probably in the 1960s and 70s. Harvesting equipment has really evolved to becoming much more efficient, where you can more rapidly cover the fields. So all of these have come into play, and there are probably some other factors as well. So what is implicated? This, in my view, there are probably some real key issues here. Number one is probably irrigation management. Number two, I think stand establishment method. A lot of growers have improved this over the years, but some still don't do a very good job with it. Harvest scheduling and technology, soil fertility, pest management, and variety. Those are probably some of the main ones that would be on my list. And all of these have to be put together as a package. Irrigation scheduling has really got is a key limiting factor for alfalfa yields, and part of it is driven by the fact that we have to go in and stop irrigating for periods of time and cut the crop. It is really our most limiting factor for maximizing alfalfa yields, and we're subject to short-term droughts, and that's due to the irrigation system limits, the harvest scheduling limits. And we very likely, in California, we likely under-irrigate our crop in the summer periods, and I think it's probably true in Pakistan as well. Harvest schedules and quality needs are major limits to the irrigation management. If you look at flood irrigation, which is usually only 1 per cutting, so you can see that we're subjecting our crop, even if you apply the right amount of water, because we're not applying it in a timely fashion, we often induce a drought that's periodic here. This is the red line is the actually cumulative ET demand, or the water demand of the crop over the season from March until October. And you can see here that, yes, we flood irrigate and we refill the profile, but at the same time, we allow droughts to occur for 10, 20 days until the next harvest, and then we can re-irrigate it. But we allow ourselves periodic droughts. A more precise irrigation system using either sprinklers or buried drip, or even more timely flood irrigations would improve that tremendously. So all of these systems can be optimized for much better water management, and I'm hoping that this will be a subject for maybe a future discussion. Pest management is another big one, particularly with weeds, but also with insects and things like nematodes. that are really key, and I won't go into this in great detail, other than we have very good pest management data on our website, the IPM website. There are a whole series of different kinds of pests that we observe in alfalfa, pardon me, and so we really need to study what's important in your country to make sure that those can be controlled. Varieties can be a limiting factor. We would recommend a continuous testing program using both local and international lines, similar to these tests that we do here in California, where we're measuring yields on a regular basis over the years. We've done this sort of simple economic analysis of how much an improved variety is worth when you put 0 value for the lowest yielding in our trials. You can see that over a 3-year period, you can gain anywhere from a few $100s to $1,000 per acre advantage just by choosing a superior yielding variety. Soil factors are another real key limiting factor. Likely in our environment, less than 20% of our growers regularly monitor and test for adequate soil fertility. This is really an important scientific issue. We need to do a lot more soil and plant monitoring. We also need to figure out how to mitigate soil limitations of drainage and salinity. You got to remember this old concept here von Liebig in the 1850s, the law of the minimum, that if you have one factor that's the most limiting, that will be your limiting factor for maximum yields. And so this is really a key issue on the soil fertility side. And so the key issue here, these are some studies that were done in farmers' fields where they left strips untreated. Is this a nitrogen issue, a phosphorus issue, potassium, sulfur, or micronutrient? And you have to do a little testing to figure that out. In our environment here, P and K are the most frequent limiting nutrients for alfalfa, and particularly phosphorus. And desert soils, this is really a key issue, and it's tied in with pH, so you need to have soils people that really help you walk through those issues on desert soils. This is Umair Gul's data set from Davis, where he did drone flights over alfalfa fields to do the analysis. I don't know if you see this on this, but you can see the little bales of alfalfa out here from the drone flights. But you can see also the tremendous amount of soil variation that's in that field. And one of the things Umair has done is to do a lot of mapping of yields of alfalfa, and you can see the range of yields is about 3-fold within one field. And so you have about 2 metric tons per hectare. This is in a single cutting, up to about 6 or 7 metric tons per hectare. And so the question is, what is the culprit here? Is it soil fertility, weeds, or irrigation? And sometimes there's a combination of all of those. And this enables us to really do some analysis of what the limitations in a field might be. Agronomic practices, this is an example of how agronomic practices can improve yields. This is an 8-cut system and a 7-cut system. This is a delayed harvest of 35 days and a normal harvest here of 28 days in the Fresno County area of California. And you can see here that in both of these varieties are superior yielding at 35 days than at 28 days. And this reduced lignin variety is actually a little lower yielding than, say, the traditional variety here, but it's still higher yielding than cut at an earlier stage. So this is the way you can combine a variety and cutting schedule combination that will optimize both yield and quality. And we have some data on that that we're just finishing up with. Here's another important technique, and that is stand establishment. And things like planting depth is really key. It's a real simple thing, but the fact is if you plant that seed too deep here at 2 to 2.5 inches, you're likely not to see much of that seed germinating. So we really need to seed it about 1 to 1.2 centimeters and pack the soil very, very nicely. The other agronomic practice that I would want to emphasize is seeding in the early fall. And this is some data from our trials here in California that shows about a 9 metric ton advantage in that first year just by seeding early in the fall and irrigating the crop up, rather than waiting until early spring or late fall where we got 0 because we had a stand failure. And so time of seeding has a big effect. Critical factors for alfalfa, I think number 1 is advanced irrigation systems. In both in technology and management and scheduling, harvest scheduling and skill, timing and technique for either silages or haymaking, agronomic practices, soil fertility and stand establishment. Preservation of quality is probably a real key issue, particularly with the leguminous forages where we need those to be preserved for the long, hot summer months. In where we need those high quality forages. Weeds and pests, particularly things that I observed in Pakistan. Dodder was a big issue for you guys. Insects, and also we need to look at looking at around the world for advanced genetics, and also continuing to breed your own advanced lines. So here are some suggestions for key strategies for the Pakistani situation, concentrating on certainly on high yields first, because alfalfa is a pretty high quality forage, and one of the issues is making sure that that yield level gets up there. Measurement of forage quality in forages, I think, is a real key issue that Umair suggested is really kind of one of those things that we should be paying more attention to, and linking that with, say, the higher class of animals that really do require these high quality forages. One of the things that I've observed in different parts of the world is that many dairy farmers, the first thing that they do when they're beginning to up their management is to divide their animals into both high producing and medium and low producing animals, or even just high and low, and feeding those animals differently, because they do require different types of feeds, and this is really a key issue. And in order to know that, you need to measure forage quality. Water and irrigation scheduling is extremely important in the case of alfalfa in particular, Berseem also, but mostly alfalfa. Silage and harvesting systems. I think that preserving high quality forages is going to be a real big challenge for growers in Pakistan. And it's a problem for us too, but we don't have the monsoons that challenge us during the growing season. Weed and pest management is also pretty important. Comprehensive variety adaptation, going around the world and looking for the best lines that might be adapted. And there's a whole package of agronomic practices that I've suggested a few of those: soil fertility, stand establishment, harvest scheduling, all of which are conducive to research and improvement. So with that, I just, I guess, open up. I don't know if you're going to wait for questions till the end, but certainly would be open to any kind of questions or challenges.
Thank you, Dan. You have given an overview of agronomic practices, and you have talked about variety. And you have not said a word about any problem with seed. Whereas in Pakistan, that is the biggest challenge. We have to get seed, the seed production and seed supply system, or you can say value chain, simply is not developed enough. And we have today some participants who have interest in seed. So maybe you want to say a few words about your seed supply chain.
Okay, yeah, I could maybe, is somebody else going to comment? Dr. Akrar, would you like me to comment on that?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I think that you've pointed out a very important thing. Keep in mind that seed production is a very challenging and technically challenging proposition. And I think the biggest problems, Dr. Akrar, are that international seed is expensive. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so so that would be certainly a limitation. one of the things, we only have about 150,000 acres of seed production in the United States, maybe 200,000 acres. And actually in the last several years, they've actually overproduced seed for the markets here in California or here in the United States. They're just working through that excess seed inventory now. And so I think one of the things that is important is that monsoon conditions are not necessarily highly conducive to seed production, because you might get untimely rains during those seed maturation processes. So you'll have to examine the locations that might be conducive to seed production. I would also suggest working with private companies that have a lot of experience on seed production, and that might be interested in helping to produce seed in Pakistan, because that's true that the exchange rates might be a real limiting factor for buying seed on the international market. It tends to be rather expensive, but I think the pest management and irrigation management, and in general, management of seed production is much more challenging than it is for alfalfa hay. We have very specialized seed growers, and there's really only maybe about 100 of them in the whole United States that actually know something about producing alfalfa seed. And so this is a real key issue, is finding, because you have to manage pollinators, you have to manage pests. So there's a lot of technology involved with that. So the short term, I would think, is looking for international markets and seeing if you can find seed on international markets. But then long term is developing those regions of Pakistan that are less rainy, but still have irrigation water for producing seed.
Okay, so monsoon is actually our limiting factor, and we have to move to drier areas where the monsoon is not a major threat to this during this seed season.
Yeah.
You are probably right, because this alfalfa in our environment starts blooming somewhere in May.
Yeah.
And then, at maturation, you have a chance of rain, and one rain is enough to destroy it. Okay, how about dodder? What do you do with dodder?
There are a range of possibilities, and of course, dodder is a intractable pest, and there's two strategies that are really important here. Number one strategy is seed quality, because dodder can be brought in with alfalfa seed. So if the alfalfa seed is produced in a region that has dodder, it is really hard to get rid of it once it's there. There are herbicide options, and there are mechanical options and burning, which are all integrated techniques. But the first thing, and I think we talked about this when we were there, about seed quality and seed certification, having seed that is certified to not have noxious weeds, and including dodder. Dodder is one of those that is an we cannot allow certified seed to be sold if it contains even one seed of dodder in that seed sample. And this is a real key issue, because once you plant that seed in a large field, and it starts germinating and producing more seed, you've bought yourself a tremendous problem for years.